Yes, I will remember when the battle comes to me, to fix my eyes on things above and not on what I see. So in the deepest struggle, in the face of great defeat, my unfair advantage is that Jesus stands with me. And all it ever takes is a little seed of faith, big enough to bring down every giant. I don't have to be afraid. In the hands of God I'm brave. He's training me to bring down every giant, so I will overcome.
1 Samuel chapter 17. A Goliath shows up and the whole of Israel is held captive, but David stands up to face that Goliath. A Goliath is some situation, some circumstance, a pain or problem that is overwhelming. In verse 4 of 1 Samuel chapter 17, the Bible tells us that Goliath was 9 foot and 6 inches tall. That's some height. In verse 9 to 7, it tells us that Goliath had 100 pounds of armor. A Goliath is that thing that is so big that it is overwhelming your existence. It intimidates you when you think about it, when you look at it, knowing that you have to deal with it. It produces emotional insecurity and instability. And the goal of Goliath is to control you and defeat you, to make you act in fear and live in bondage. And Goliaths come in all shapes and forms. There can be medical Goliaths, financial, relational, circumstantial, and career Goliaths. The problem with this one thing is that it affects everything else, and it just won't go away. The Bible tells us in verse 16 that Goliath kept coming at them day after day for 40 days. Friends, you either have faced a Goliath, or you're facing a Goliath, or you're about to face one. And I've called it a Goliath, so at least you know how the story would end. It's not enough to have a covenant with God. The question is, are you living under that covenant? All of Israel had a covenant with God, but David was living under that covenant. Sometimes the problem is not the absence of power or the absence of connection to the source of power. It is actually the absence of alignment. David, to defeat Goliath, first of all, came in alignment with God. God is not saying that you won't have a Goliath. God just doesn't want Goliath to rule you and run your life. And so David was seeing the problem from the lens of the covenant. David said, this Goliath is an uncircumcised Philistine. You need to realize that circumcision was a covenant issue. David was simply saying that this Goliath has no covenant or covering that empowers him over me. If what you see is all you see, then you haven't seen all that there is to see. David could see the problem through the lens of his covenant with God. The second thing David did was to recount God's faithfulness. He said, God gave me victory over a bear, gave me victory over a lion. David recounted God's faithfulness because God's faithfulness is offensive to your circumstance. God sometimes will require that you take an offensive posture to your Goliath. God told Moses to hold out his rod and tell the people to start moving forward before he even opened the Red Sea. God told Joshua, tell the priests to put their foot in the Jordan before he ever held back the water. God told Peter to cast on the other side of the boat his net before God ever filled the net. God told Martha to move the stone in John chapter 11 before he ever brought Lazarus from the dead. God wants to see you walk by faith and not just talk about faith. And then in Psalm 25 verse 12 to 14, the Bible tells us that the ones who are in God's covenant shall know his ways, and he will show them his secrets. So in defeating a giant, God gives you a divine strategy. David says, I come in the name of the Lord. And what he simply did was to give a revelation of the bigger one. What David is saying to Goliath is that you're big, but I've come with someone who is bigger than you. Remind your situation of how big your God is. Friends, giants do fall, and giants are still falling. Your own giant is coming down. God bless you and have a great day, friend.
This will be the battle cry that